Microplastics are showing up in human brains, and Argentina construction workers uncovered a super weird, alien-like skull, and in Utah, a guy fishing found a human skull half buried in the mud with more bones scattered nearby, and no one knows who they belong to. These are disturbing discoveries in 2025. When scientists at the University of New Mexico started digging into human brain tissue samples, they found something no one really wanted to find: microplastics in the brain, and in higher amounts than in organs like the liver or kidney. The team, led by toxicologist Matthew Kempen, reported that these fragments, some as tiny as 200 nanometers, have steadily climbed, with concentrations up to about 50% in the past 8 years. Kempen said this really changes the landscape, makes it so much more personal. He also pointed out that some brains from people with dementia carried up to 10 times as much plastic than in other brains. But does that mean microplastics are causing dementia? Well, it's not definitive proof. Maybe damaged brains just accumulate more of the plastic, not the other way around. But as for how the plastic gets in, it might come from food or water, say livestock eating plastic-contaminated crops, or fields irrigated with water that has traces of plastic in it. Construction workers in San Fernando, Argentina were digging for a new water system when they hit a burial urn. Inside was a human skull, but not one that looked normal. As you can see, this thing is pretty oddly shaped, almost alien-like. Even experts admitted the thing looked unsettling. The skull was taken to the provincial anthropology department to be studied. Scientists confirmed the skull is real, but no one agrees yet on how it ended up that way. One strong theory ties it to an ancient practice called artificial cranial deformation, where a baby's head was deliberately shaped using wooden boards or tight bandages while the skull bones were still soft. It sounds brutal, but thousands of years ago it was common in South America. Cultures who lived in the region between the 3rd and 12th centuries viewed it as a way to show their family's status in society, or to give the child a special spiritual or cultural identity. Back in March, a man named Philip Morfin was out fishing in West Valley City, Utah, when something strange caught his eye near the edge of the water. At first he thought it was an animal skull half buried in the mud, poked it with his fishing rod to flip it over, and that's when he realized what he was actually looking at. 2 eye sockets in the teeth. I saw a human skull. It was pretty disturbing, he told reporters. The spot where he was fishing sits next to a business park, not exactly where you'd expect to find human remains. Police showed up just after 7 p.m., confirmed that the bones looked human. Roxanne Vanku from the West Valley City Police said the medical examiner was called in to come and collect the remains. She also mentioned that other bones were found nearby, some of them partially underwater. Right now, no one knows who the remains belong to. Investigators are going through old missing persons reports, but Vanku said there aren't any unsolved homicides in the area. We're waiting for the medical examiner's office to conduct tests to try and identify the remains, she said. In August, an anonymous source was driving through the desert outside Searchlight, Nevada, when they came across dozens of small ash piles scattered across the sand. When they got closer, they realized they were looking at cremated human remains. About 70 piles of burnt bone and ash were found near a dirt road just outside the town. The person sent a photo to the news, who then contacted the police. The Nevada Bureau of Land Management confirmed the ashes were human. They're still trying to figure out where they came from or who put them there. It's not illegal for someone to scatter cremated remains in the desert, but the agency made it clear that, quote, individual, non-commercial scattering is the only kind allowed. Dumping large amounts like this could break several laws, especially if it's a business behind it. Just weeks before this too, a Las Vegas funeral home was shut down after inspectors found decomposing bodies that had been sitting around for months. One was actually there for nearly a year. Searchlight is only about an hour south of Vegas, so Around that same time though, a funeral home in Colorado was caught hiding 20 rotting corpses behind a secret door and giving families fake ashes. But why the hell? Why? That is so creepy. Anyway, is it possible someone drove from Colorado to Nevada to burn the remains? Maybe, but at this point the mystery has not been solved. So in Gdansk, Poland, construction workers were tearing up the ground under this old ice cream shop, and instead of just finding pipes and junk, they hit something else. a medieval knight's tomb. This was just back in July, but the shop had been there for decades and nobody had a clue there was an entire burial ground under it. Archaeologists were called in, and they found the knight buried with pieces of his chainmail armor still intact. His tombstone had a carving of a knight holding a shield, though the coat of arms was too worn out to make out. And that means no one knows yet who this guy was. They've already found more than 200 other graves in the same area, along with the remains of an old wooden church that used to stand there though. But now everything is being taken to the Gdansk Archaeological Museum so they can figure out who this armored mystery man actually was. In April of 2025, construction crews at Temple University ended up digging up human remains and old caskets. The site sits on the Old Monument Cemetery, which opened in 1837 and once held about 28,000 bodies. When the university expanded in the 50s, most of those graves were disturbed. Headstones were dumped along the Delaware River and only a few families were contacted. Now, decades later, Temple ran into the leftovers. Work stopped right away. Archaeologists, police, and the coroner were called in. Temple said they followed all the experts' guidance to handle everything respectfully. Historians say this isn't exactly a surprise, though. Seth Brugman, a history professor at Temple, explained that the cemetery had been a green space for the city, but the university claimed it was neglected so they could expand parking and take over the main entrance. In 2025, the conversation around climate change shifted from just worrying about, heat waves to realizing we might have unlocked something much worse. This year's global climate update in September showed that temperatures are still climbing. We're almost past the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that world leaders promised to stay under in the Paris Agreement. That's the international deal made back in 2015 where nearly every country agreed to try to slow down global warming, but the report showed things aren't going great in that regard. Carbon pollution is still going up too. Sea levels are rising faster than ever, and places like Asia are heating nearly twice as fast as the global average. But then there's what's coming out of the melting ground. That's really what we're talking about here. A United Nations report in July confirmed that thawing glaciers and permafrost are now releasing ancient microbes. Haven't seen sunlight for tens of thousands of years. Permafrost is basically frozen ground that's been sealed off since the Ice Age. It acts like a natural freezer, keeping old bacteria and viruses perfectly preserved, but more importantly, frozen and away from us. But with all the melting going on, all this stuff could be released. Researchers have already isolated some of these old viruses, sometimes called zombie viruses, because they've been able to bring them back to life, so to speak, in the lab. And they found genetic traces of stuff known to infect humans, like ancient smallpox-like and herpes-type strains. This immediately got groups like Greenpeace worried that these zombie viruses could unleash a pandemic. In 2025, scientists started realizing that the combo of artificial intelligence and synthetic biology, the same technology that was supposed to save the world, might actually be the thing that breaks it. The idea was that AI could help design new medicines, better fuels, maybe even clean up pollution, but it can also do the opposite. It can design weapons just as easily as it designs cures. Researchers started calling it the dual-use dilemma. Basically, AI has gotten so good at building and improving biological systems that it doesn't really know the difference between making a vaccine and making a virus. A Nature study from this year warned that AI programs can already design new proteins and genetic code faster than any human could. That used to take massive labs and teams of experts. Now, someone with a decent computer and the right software could, in theory, create something very deadly. It puts serious power into way too many hands. And then there's the other issue. No one's really able to keep up with how fast this is moving. Regulators are already behind. Some AI tools even create fake biological data, which makes it harder to tell if someone's doing legitimate research or hiding something. We've built tools so powerful we might not be able to stop what they can do. When geochemist Mengren Du piloted her submersible between Russia and Alaska earlier this year, she was supposed to be heading back up. She'd had about 30 minutes left of dive time, but then she decided to veer off course for one last look. And what a great decision that was, because what she found nearly 30,000 feet down in the pitch-black Addle Zone was what Du described as amazing creatures. Clams and tube worms living where no sunlight has ever reached. There was an entire ecosystem where life is not powered by sunlight at all, but by methane, leaking from the seafloor. The creatures rely on bacteria living inside them, which turns gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide into energy. A study published on July 30th in Nature revealed that these microbes can even create their own organic food from carbon dioxide. Dew's team also found that Hadal trenches might trap and recycle massive amounts of carbon. It's the deepest underwater ecosystem we've ever found that survives on chemicals instead of sunlight. In 2025, it became impossible to ignore just how fragile our digital world really is. Earlier in the year, a company called VeraSource, which helps businesses check credit and handle payments, got broken into. Hackers stole the names, addresses, birthdays, and social security numbers of about 4 million people. Then a few months later, TransUnion, a big credit reporting company, had a hack through a third-party app, putting another 4 million people at risk. A lot of the time, the problem isn't the big companies themselves, it's the smaller companies they rely on. For example, hackers got into Qantas, the airline, through a service they use called Salesforce, and ended up leaking data for 5.7 million customers. Discord and Workday had similar problems. Basically, every time a company lets another company handle some of their work, it opens up the door for hackers. Some hacks were even more serious too, like the Williams and Connolly law firm, which got the FBI involved because foreign hackers might have been behind it. Private legal info, corporate secrets, national intelligence, it's all at risk. Well, with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.